any debate and discussion afterwards is not. This week's session is in two halves. We are having a political report from Mike McNair of the PCC, followed by a report from Jack Conrad on forging communist unity. And without any further ado, actually there is further ado, should you wish to make a contribution, if you can use the raise hand option, which is under reactions on your device. If you post to the chat, I will try and convey any chat room comments to the speakers so they can respond to them, but it would be preferable for comrades to make their contribution verbally. Without any further ado, this time I will hand over to Mike McNair, if he's available.
No, we still don't have him. Just give us a few minutes.
Sorry for the delay, comrades.
Do you want to briefly mention Communist University next weekend?
Yes, although I'm not sure I have a great deal of details on that. We do have Communist University coming up this weekend, following weekend, I should say. The theme is imperialism and war, I understand. If anyone has got any details around the timetables for that, this might be a useful opportunity to share those, perhaps paste them into the forum. I don't have access to it on my laptop, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, but we might need to start with you, Jack. We don't have Mike, so can you start, please?
Okay, thanks, John. We'll go over to you.
Well, there's a surprise. I was just relaxing, sipping my tea. Okay, so the idea was that Mike would give the political report, and I would report then on the meeting yesterday of what is now been newly named for communist forging. I'm going to get it right eventually. Forging communist unity. Now, if comrades read my little article in this week's paper, I don't know, do you want to go first, Mike? I really do think it's the best way round. I would really prefer that. I think it'd be a much better way. So we've got Mike on board now. Rather than me charging ahead, if it's okay with the organisers, I will continue to sip my tea and hand over to Mike McNair.
Sure, he has to unmute Mike, and your screen is wobbly, but will do. Go ahead.
Hey, Mike, you're still muted.
It's okay, go ahead. That's unmute and go ahead. Unmute.
It's not looking good.
No, it would appear that we're having some technical difficulties in with Mike McNair. Jack, I think we are going to have to come to you, and hopefully Michael has resolved his technical difficulties when it's him.
Apologies for that, comrades. Thanks for your patience. Okay, as I was saying to begin with, for those that have read the article by myself in this current edition of the paper will know what we're talking about. This is a meeting or a series of meetings between an organization called Talking About Socialism. We have had them referred to and written about in the paper before. It's them and the editorial board of an online journal called Prometheus. also initially involved, but mainly as a, how should we put it, facilitator. We have had the online organization called Why Marx. And what we were told, I think quite rightly, by their representatives, is as it isn't really an organization, what they would do is to continue to support this particular project using educationals and other.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Mike. What we're doing, Mike, is oh dear.
Can I hear anyone else? I can't at the moment.
Sorry,
Technical
can
difficulties.
we mute Mike?
No, it's not Mike.
That's it. Sorry, Microsoft's auto updater disabled my desktop, and I'm had to set up the laptop in order to get on contact with some difficulty. Okay, I think.
Oh, let
Okay.
Mike go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm bailing out. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, Mike. You're probably not aware. We've had a little bit of a rocky start to this particular online communist forum. So apologies to those comrades who are with us. Yes. So Mike, if we can hand over to you for the political report, and then we'll go back to John, who was making a start on his report around the discussions that have been taking place with TASS and Prometheus.
Okay, have comrades got me connected? I seems to have frozen for me. As long as comrades can hear me, that's okay. We begin with Donald Trump on Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal, particularly Greenland, but Canada and the Panama Canal as important. The fundamental point about these is that they are to be these claims of Donald Trump's are in fact to be taken seriously. We can't regard them as being election campaigning, because he's been elected without an amendment to the US Constitution. He isn't entitled to stand for a third time. Okay, he might decide to ignore that, but he's of a considerable age at present. And if we think about it, there's an inherent logic in suggestions, which is an important one for understanding where we are in terms of the world situation. Starting with Greenland, physically large, very small population, 56,000, half the size of the town where I live, Oxford. It's currently, but very large and important potential, at least mineral products, important potential territorial claims as global warming progresses and we see the North Polar area becoming decreasingly ice covered. As we're seeing also actually the Putin administration pushing the possibilities of the Northeast Passage between Arkhangelsk and Sakhalin, and talk of the Northwest Passage around northern Canada. Currently, Greenland is a colonial possession of Denmark. I say colonial possession because, of course, it was a colonial possession of Denmark. It was a colonial possession of Norway, Denmark, on the basis of some frankly dodgy claim on the basis of the Icelandic colonization of Greenland in the Middle Ages, and the equally dodgy Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Danish, Norwegian, because Denmark and Norway were one country until the Napoleonic Wars, when Norway was appropriated by Sweden, and then the British sponsored Norwegian independence from Sweden in 1912, I think it is. In any case, So Denmark, Norway had some sort of a claim to Iceland, and Iceland had some sort of a claim to Greenland. And in consequence, 1721, we get Danish missionaries landing in Greenland, and we've got a thin layer of Danish population in a predominantly, I won't say Inuit, but it's that general family of northern Canadian, northern Alaskan, Aleutian Islands, American indigenes. So thin Danish population, coupled with that, it's technically part of Denmark, unquote, but with home rule and quite extensive home rule powers. And the current head of government says is a national head of a nationalist party in Greenland, and says that Greenland will be seeking independence. Yay, but excuse me, it's independent, but it's dependent on Denmark financially. And is it the case that Greenland can, on its own, out of its own resources, get up a mining industry and feed the miners and all of these things? No, in reality, it would need to be somebody else who was putting in the investment to exploit the mineral resources. From the United States point of view, it could be China. Terrible threat. Whether the Chinese would actually want to do that is, of course, an open question. But it's also recognized that the United States is a continental. The United States is not merely a thalassocracy, that's an empire of the seas. It is a thalassocracy and has been since late 19th century. But the Netherlands, well, Venice, Genoa, the Netherlands, England were all basically thalassocracies, empires of the seas with far-flung colonial possessions across the world. The United States has always been, in addition to that, a continental expansionist power, the power that embarked on the genocidal dispossession of the Native American population at a very early stage. George Washington is supposed to have sent smallpox-infected clothing to the Iroquois to wipe them out as far as possible. Andrew Jackson launched the Trail of Tears, the formal dispossession of the Native Americans of their land, which was then sold off. And Manifest Destiny was supposed to involve the conquest of the entire North American continent. Polk, in his election campaign, 1844-45, the slogan was in circulation, 54-40 or fight, which meant taking what's now British Columbia off Canada. And indeed, in 1840, adventurers operating out of the northern US states had attempted to raise rebellions with a view to adding Ontario to the United States without much success. 54-40 or fight didn't seem like such an attractive idea when Polk was actually in office, because it would have involved taking on the British Navy. Not such a good idea for the States in the 1840s, and instead they went after Mexico. Manifest Destiny, again, still at work, and seized California, Arizona, New Mexico. So the United States' long history of colonial expansionism and claims on Canada were episodic throughout the claims on Canada, US claims on Canada were episodic throughout the 19th century. I referred to 1840 and 54-40 or fight. The War of 1812 was partly fought as an American invasion of Canada, at the end it's unsuccessful, as well as the British invasion, more famous British invasion of the United States, which is various people comment on. Is it the British the only country ever to have actually invaded the United States and burned down the Capitol in Washington and the White House, and then got badly beaten in outside New Orleans. Okay, so long history of continental expansionism of the United States and obvious strategic interests in relation to Greenland, similarly in relation to the Panama Canal, which is a choke point for Atlantic Pacific trade, in the same way a Suez Canal could function as a choke point, and it's more seriously a choke point for Atlantic Pacific trade. Because Cape Horn is a much worse place to be routing your shipping around than the Cape of Good Hope. So the US has a strategic interest in getting back control over the Panama Canal Zone, which it handed over to Panama. But of course, it has also held de facto control. Its mate, General Noriega, when he started getting a bit too boisterous and not playing ball, the United States militarily intervened and overthrew him. So Panama is not exactly a fully independent state. Canada is it's a rather bigger, larger scale proposition, but it's perfectly possible to imagine the United States wanting to annex Canada. And in a sense, what we're seeing is, and I think this is an important point, we're seeing a tipping point or transition point. This is part of a transition point in which the world is transitioning out of the United Nations regime created in 1945 and going to much more the strongest take what they can and the rest put up regime of world of geopolitics. We can see that in the United States is threats over anybody who complies with the International Criminal Court's orders against members of the Israeli government will be sanctioned, and if necessary, the United States will invade the Netherlands in order to get arrest the members of the International Criminal Court. We can see it also this Christmas in a little spy exchange which has taken place. I say spy exchange, it's not a spy exchange properly. The United States ordered the arrest of an Iranian in Italy on the basis of allegations that he's, quote, a terrorist, in reality being that he's supposed to be involved in some way in the Iranian government's missile program. And the Iranian government promptly responded by taking a hostage in the form of an Italian journalist who may well have been guilty of some form of, quote, seditious behavior in Iran. But the Italian government appears to have given way in order to get their journalist back, to agree that they wouldn't extradite this Iranian to the United States. Now, that's not wholly a novelty, because China has been doing the same thing with the United States, and Russia has been doing the same thing with the United States. But the fact that US allies, which Italy is a US ally, are driven, and Meloni is a far-right prime minister, are driven to do the same thing, are driven to play the hostage game with Iran, in this case, because of the United States strong-arming them to arrest this character, is an illustration of the United States' shift from primus inter pares, first among equals, according to the UN regime, to the assertion of bare sovereignty over the world. And these Trump suggestions of using coercion to take the Panama Canal, and using coercion to take Greenland, and using economic coercion to force the Canadians into the US. It's not impossible, because the British used economic coercion to force the Scots into the Union in 1705, 1707. This is much movement into naked force of the US. Second, and arising out of this one, is Chris Cutrone of the Platypus organization has an article out celebrating Trump's claims. The United States, he says, has liberated the world twice and three times if we count the winning the Cold War. And it's to do so again, so that the expansion of the United States is the future. Now, background to this, Platypus, Cutrone characterizes his background as being part Spartacist, part Adorno, Frankfurt School. Both of these backgrounds entail a degree of American chauvinism, because the Spartacists, James Robertson, you can look up and find on the web the transcript of James Robertson's astonishing drunk rant, American chauvinist rant, about the uselessness of all the other nationalities involved in the international Spartacist tendency, as it then was. But behind that is Robertson's self-identification with James P. Cannon, who was the leader, before he was a Trotskyist, of a nativist faction in the Communist Party of the USA, which was opposed to the allegedly excessive influence of European immigrants from Germany, Italy, Eastern Europe, in the CPUSA. Adorno, of course, Frankfurt School, but Adorno in the 1960s, late 1960s, in his last years, very clearly Cold Warrior. So the Platypus is started out as a anti-war a movement which was characterized by thinking that the anti-war movement, anti-Iraq war movement, was dominated by anti-Semitism. Grew up at the University of Chicago, influence of Moshe Postoni, who wrote a famous and ridiculous article on anti-Semitism, which was widely celebrated, and then a book, Time, Labor and Social Domination, which is obviously crap as soon as you start reading it. It's quoting Marx for the things that Marx denounced, for propositions of Ferdinand Lassalle that Marx denounced in Critique of the Gotha Program. But in essence, what's happened with Cutrone is that this tendency has been an anti-imperialist tendency throughout its existence, but more cautious and cagey and less willing to say explicitly what its political positions are. And Cutrone's celebration of Trump's annexationism, as it were, I won't say let the cat out of the bag, but certainly the shell of the left is dead, long live the left, which was Platypus's slogan, is sloughed off, and what's left behind is the American chauvinism, US chauvinism, which is at the core of the politics. This is not the only, the platypus, of course, is not the only example of social patriotism we have in the world. Not the we have in this country the AWL, but we also have a whole raft of people in this country who think of themselves as leftists, but who are gung-ho for Ukraine, self-defense of Ukraine, just like the self-defense of plucky little Serbia, bleeding Belgium in 1914. 18, and it's a sense of how disoriented the left is. We have equally Paul Mason recently made a fellow of a defense institute, former activist of workers' power, subsequently journo, but while he was a journo, still writer of why it's all kicking off, about advocating mass strike policy. Mason's is not a particularly unusual trajectory, because it's the same as the trajectory of Eugen von Vollmar, mass strike advocate in the 1880s. In 1890, in his El Dorado speeches, announced the beginning of the policy with the German revisionist tendency, and so on. Okay. Beyond these are a load of very short points, a number of series of short points of one sort and another. Ukraine, the Azov Brigade is recruiting an English language battalion and engaged in playing up its own role and insisting that it will fight to the end for Ukraine's land, that is, irrespective of any peace deal. The primary conclusion from this is we should avoid the illusion which says Donald Trump is going to bring an end to the Ukraine war. We don't actually know. Donald Trump has said that he will bring an end to the Ukraine war. He said that if the Russians don't comply, he will let hell loose, etc., etc., etc. We don't have clarity. And if we ask the question what the underlying interest of the United States is, the answer is that it is actually the underlying interest of the United States that this war should continue until it issues in a clear Russian defeat, which can precipitate regime change in Moscow. And indeed, Trump's envoy's peace proposals, which were published before Christmas, and we've referred to before, would involve European NATO armies putting boots on the ground at the demarcation line drawn where the armies are currently located. That is to say, it would set the seal for a tripwire where any breaches or alleged breaches or false flag operations would create an immediate open war between NATO and Russia. Gaza, another short note. A recent study by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine very substantially expands the number of casualties to be understood to have occurred in Gaza by way of the analysis of excess deaths. Having said that, it's extraordinary. There's a sense, given what Israel has done in Gaza, it's extraordinary how low the casualties are. We aren't, as we expected, up in the hundreds of thousands. It may well be that part of what's going on in the other thing, which we're getting a lot of reports of, which is deliberate Israeli attacks on medical facilities. As these Israeli attacks on medical facilities are designed to produce the result that we get the casualties up into the hundreds of thousands towards the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is plainly the Israeli policy. Number 5, Syria. it's becoming clear, this is from Comrade Yasemin's work, it's becoming clear this is not a straightforwardly the case that there's as it were, the Kurds in northeastern Syria, the government in control of the center, and a third bloc. There's a significant uptick in ISIS operations. And the government is a government which is not merely of Syrians, and certainly not merely of Syrian nationalists, because it's including Tajik and Chechen jihadis in the government appointments. So that where is the situation in Syria going? We have to be very, very cautious about assessing what's going on. But the underlying dynamic is one which the Israeli government has pursued as policy for decades, of the breakup of the country rather than of its the creation of a stable political regime in Syria. Los Angeles fires, big scale, spectacular, mainly so far affecting northern LA, high value suburbia, running out of water. The Trump blames the Democrats for mismanagement of water. The Independent Institute, who are a far-right libertarian group who I get circulars from on a know your enemy basis, also blames the California government for not having purely privatized fire services. The idea that privatized fire services would have been more careful with the availability and expenditure of water than the state is more than slightly implausible. I should go back to English law of the 1870s and Atkinson and the Newcastle Waterworks Company, which is the man who sued the waterworks for failing to maintain sufficient water pressure in the fire hydrants, with the result that the fire engine couldn't put out the fire at his house. The Lord Chancellor, Lord Cairns, rules that it would be totally unreasonable for any government to have entered into a contract for the water company to be obliged to maintain sufficient water pressure in the fire hydrants for the fire service to use. At the same time, the middle classes, on the other hand, in Los Angeles, are beginning to blame the ultra-rich, who have been disregarding the controls on water use in order to keep using sprinklers and keep swimming pools in operation and so on and so forth, with the result that there isn't enough water available in the reservoirs for fighting the fires. But we have to look behind this. At one level, there are reasonably good reasons for supposing that climate change has resulted in increased fire risk. This is this has been an unusually dry December and January in California, which has made increased fire risk. But equally, why is there a shortage of water in the water mains and the reservoirs and so on and so forth? To a considerable extent, what lies behind that is the drying out of water supplies across the western United States as a result of the melting of the snowpack on the Rockies. In the same way as we have problems with water supplies in continental Europe as a result of retreating glaciers and melting snowpack and so on and so forth. Trump, of course, drill, baby, drill, and likely also to be another source of sanctions and protectionism will be directed against anybody who wants to do climate mitigation activities of one sort and another. We are in the midst of, as we have been actually for a while, an intense Tory campaign, the Tories having seen that the Labour Party got a large majority of seats in the House of Commons, but on the basis of a really small plurality of votes in the low 30s, has been pushing every opportunity to try and dislodge this government. And in particular, the current target, we've got Tulip Siddiq, who's a target simply because of dodgy relations with the government of the Awami League in Bangladesh, which has recently been overthrown. And the Tory press has now dug up pictures of Keir Starmer being pally with Sheikh Hasina and so on. But Rachel Reeves in particular is being blamed for the bad state of the British economy. And of course, what's left out here is that the first place, what Rachel Reeves has inherited is serious adverse consequences of Brexit and the failure of Brexit's expectations of delivering trade deals with the United States, with India, with blah, 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 blah. Secondly, in fact, also that the Tory government in its last years, when it became apparent after Liz Truss that they had no practical possibility of winning the next election, carried out, in essence, a wrecking operation by imposing tax cuts, which they knew weren't funded and would cause, reduce the room for manoeuvre of any incoming Labour government. It's sort of characteristic, go along with that Liz Truss should be threatening to sue Keir Starmer for defamation for saying that she crashed the economy, when the Tories are now saying that Rachel Reeves has crashed the economy on the basis of her inability to deal with the inheritance which she's got from the Tories. And then finally, last and pretty much certainly least, we got on the back page of this week's Weekly Worker a very useful article by Carla Roberts about collective, which is Corbynism without Corbyn actually being prepared to put himself at the head of it, including, at least in an observer status, the Socialist Party of England and Wales, but Spew are still pushing Tusk hard in their paper, so they aren't sort of abandoning Tusk in favour of collective. And with Alex Kalinikos in Socialist Worker writing in a coded way which suggests that the SWP might be willing to come on board, but whether collective is interested in having the Trots on board is very doubtful. In reality, it would almost certainly, if it allowed the Trots on board at all, it would be with tight bureaucratic controls to prevent the Trots possibly taking over. And in reality, do they have any forces other than the Trots, which would, they have potential generals, well, but in reality, Corbyn himself is not on board. This looks like another story of one or another these various insubstantial official bureaucratic operations. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Can I just check before we open up for discussion? Yasmin, will we be live streaming the debate around Mike's presentation? Because normally we don't. But I'm just conscious that we have a meeting in two halves.
Andy, I think we're going
We
to
don't live stream anything. We're just waiting for Jack to speak now. That's the idea. And
Yeah,
then
Jack
we'll
would come
decide.
in next.
Okay, so we'll have the debate. Okay, we'll take the debate for both halves after Jack's spoken. Okay, that's great. Okay, over to you, Jack.
Right, third time. Yeah, I mean, ideally we would have a sort of debate around what Mike talked about, but I think that's at the moment beyond our technical abilities, let alone
We seem to be fumbling.
how we started the meeting at 5. Okay, to reprise. I'm giving a report of the meeting yesterday, which is now officially called Forging Communist Unity. This was reported in a short article by myself in the latest edition of the Weekly Worker. It involves 3 organizations. Initially, it sort of involved 4, but the reality was, and that's where we're at, that the facilitator, which is an organization called 4 Marks, basically say, well, we're not really an organization. So really what we're dealing with at the moment, and that looks like what we'll be dealing with in the immediate future, is 3 organizations. First of all, the CPGB. Secondly, talking about socialism. We featured them in the pages of the Weekly Worker over the recent period. And another organization, an online publication called Prometheus. This organization sort of began the process by actually commissioning or calling for articles around the party question. And they've received articles not only from Mike McNair and Y. Marks, but a whole range of different opinions, ranging from the we want a communist party, which is our sort of perspective, right over to we want yet another broad left party of the sort that Mike referred to, which is presently going under the name a collective, one of a long line of failures of that sort. So yes, these 3 organizations came together, first of all, in a meeting late last year, December the 14th, if I'm not mistaken. My initial response when I heard about it was, oh God, what's going to happen here? I was very pleased, on the other hand, and all the other participants at the meeting, i.e. the representatives of the 3 organizations I've already referred to, came out of the December 14th meeting with a very different impression. I went in on the basis, I don't think much is going to come out of this. I came out of it on the basis saying, actually, these people appear to be serious. This actually heralds something positive, because it can send a very important message to the rest of the left that we can overcome sectism on the one side and broad frontism and soggy politics and liquidationism on the other. Either way, we finished our December the 14th meeting on the basis that we would reconvene and give a report back from our respective organizations. And I did that. We had an aggregate, when was it? God help us, just recently. So that would be, what, a week ago. Before that, we'd had a provisional central committee meeting, and I could report back to the comrades that the provisional central committee is, enthusiastic about this fusion process, is willing to support and put resources and effort into this fusion process. And I could give a similar report from our aggregate. So while, of course, comrades were right to voice some skepticism, given our experience of individuals and organizations associated with the other 2, I think the general consensus, we didn't take a vote, there was no need to take a vote, is that comrades were enthused by the prospect of fusion. So that was my report to the comrades. We'd already, at our aggregate, adding to the enthusiasm, had the statement from the steering committee of talking about socialism, a very positive statement again in the Weekly Worker. They want a communist party. It's worthwhile pointing out that the comrades are changing their own formulations in terms of what they stand for and what they're fighting for. And they're changing this, not my words, their words, this rather indistinct, what we're aiming for is a socialist / communist party, straightforwardly to a communist party. That is progress. It's also progress, very welcome progress, that they explicitly state they are in favor of what they call frank exchanges, what we would call robust and frank polemics. That is definitely a step forward. And what they're in favor of is going forward as long as it takes, but as speedily as possible. So that was, again, very positive. Now, the comrades, you go onto their website, I've done that myself, have put their statement to their supporters and are awaiting meetings to actually see what the response to it is. I think we're all hopeful, we're all optimistic, but we wait in terms of the next meeting to get a report back on that. We had a similar report back, but not as advanced, from the editorial board of Promethean. There were two comrades from the organization. One called Comrade Alex, he's actually a member of RS21. This is the split from the SWP around the Martin Smith question. This is the full name of it, I suppose is worthwhile. Revolutionary Socialism in the 21st Century. Quite a mouthful, so you can understand why they've shortened it to RS21. Now, what the comrades have done, this group that is organized under the umbrella of Promethean, is that they've actually carried out a struggle in the ranks of RS21 and won the organization formally to commit itself in the future to a communist party. That is a step forward. Worthwhile noting, however, of course, that the SWP in their rules call themselves revolutionary communists. It's not something they normally, wave about, but under pressure from RCP 2, not the latest RCP 3, RCP 2 of Frank Furudi and the Next Step and all the rest of it, which was a split in terms of its origins from IS, SWP. I think they changed their rules as a counter there. But what's also been positive with these comrades, I think the Weekly Worker deserves some credit here, but good on them too, is they've shifted the organization, RS21, from taking a social chauvinist, a social imperialist position on the Ukraine war. This organization was an affiliate of the ghastly Ukraine solidarity movement of Chris Ford, which has not only Paul Mason has already been referred to, John McDonnell, but also the social imperialists of the AWL, Anti-Capitalist Resistance, Labour Representation Committee, if it still exists. They've broken them from that. And in a recent, I don't think they call it an aggregate, but that's our tradition. In a recent aggregate, the organization voted for a pretty healthy position on the Ukraine war. So the comrades aren't just doing a cosmetic job. There's something more profound going on. And what Comrade Alex reported to us is that next month at the organization's next aggregate, there will be a declaration of a communist platform, a communist fraction within RS21. And there seems to be a debate. We had an official representative of RS21 at our first meeting who was a bit, I'm here to see what's going on. Maybe they were there to see what unofficial RS21 was doing. But there seems to be a debate going on in RS21 about regroupment. Some of it's very positive, such as Comrade Alex and the comrades organized around this, as I say, online publication. Others are talking about, well, we can't touch the SWP. That's where we came from, and we think the SWP stinks. Others of them, I presume the rump social imperialists, are talking about anti-capitalist resistance, the Mandelites, people who used to be going around the streets of London when I was a little kid, well, teenager, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, victory to Viet Cong, who now, last time I saw them out on the streets of London, were going around shouting at the prompting of the AWL, at the prompting of Paul Mason, arm, arm, arm Ukraine. Paul Mason, by the way, someone who's agitating for a 5% GDP budget in terms of arms. So the comrade is putting forward, what's going on in a very positive way in terms of RS21. So we're not just talking about 3 organizations. You can already see the possibility of, the ripples going out into the left. Now, what we agreed was not to pursue the suggestion, the revamped suggestion that came from Y. Marx of a series of public seminars. We've not rejected the idea of a public aspect to this, but the fundamental approach that the 3 organizations are taking is this is between 3 organizations. And a lot of it, most of it, will take place in private, not because we've got anything to hide, but precisely because we're serious. And what I put forward, not immediately, but as we actually progress our discussions, if they are progressing, and in my estimate, there's every reason to be confident, we reach a stage of we say, look, we've got a pretty good basis of agreement. We might differ on this, we might differ on that, but hey, what we had from myself was a suggestion at some point in the course of these discussions, in order to continue participating in these discussions, the participants would have to pledge to abide by a unity conference decision. In other words, for example, if it came, I mean, this is me being facetious now. If it came, for example, to the founding conference of the original CPGB back in 1920, I think it was a comrade, leading comrade called Stewart, who actually moved that the organization commit itself to teetotalism. The idea would be, I'm horrified by the prospect, that if we were going into a conference, we would be bound by what that conference voted for. So, for example, if Comrade Stewart, God help me, voted for teetotalism, I put up my hand against, but the majority put their hand up for, I would be bound by that decision and would be pledged before going into that conference to be bound by that decision. Okay, that's a facetious example, but the main point really about 1920, the big debates, the important debates, the real debate was, do we participate in Parliament, yes or no? A surprising number who didn't want to. Should we vote to affiliate to the Labour Party? Again, in spite of Lenin lending all of his authority to it, those votes were quite narrow. But the interesting thing, the significant thing here was that the minority not only had pledged themselves to abide by majority decisions, they did it. And what we had is CPGB attempts to affiliate, We had CPGB both standing as Labour candidates, as Communist Labour candidates, as Labour Party candidates, quite successfully as well. So that's something that we pledged to do. And on the question of Promethean, what we had is the comrade who wasn't in RS21 saying that she would pledge at the appropriate moment to abide by a unity conference. And so therefore, what we suggested in terms of TAS and the CPGB is that we were proposing, it's up to the comrades, to send representatives of the two other organizations to the editorial board to see what the doubts, to see what the fears, to see what the alternative projects are, to persuade the editorial board to move at the same pace as us. If need be, maybe to separate, that a minority came with the fusion process, hopefully a majority, hopefully all of them come. But that is something for further down the line. So we've agreed to reconvene in a fortnight. Nick Rack, I think rightly made the suggestion that patience was a good idea. We don't want to rush things. There's no need to be impatient. He also suggested, which I readily took up, and I think this is something that we can implement, is face-to-face meetings. And he suggested face-to-face meetings between the leaderships. I think that's a good idea. I mean, we're also used now to Zoom meetings, polemics in newspaper articles, polemics, online. They're all valuable, but actually getting together in the same room, over a cup of coffee, over a pint of beer, that is definitely something positive. So I can report back progress. I can report a very positive atmosphere from what is now called FCU. That's it. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Jack. Okay, before I open it up for general discussion, both about Jack's report back from what I think are very positive developments, and obviously Mike's opening as well. I am aware that we have at least one comrade from the Prometheus editorial board with us tonight. I don't recognise whether we've got anyone from TAS